today we're gonna have a hard episode. We're gonna talk about a fairly advanced Dynamo script, and the main reason why I want to discuss about a subject like this is because I've had a project where I came upon a very particular situation where I didn't know necessarily how to design the structural components around it. So just to put everybody in perspective, I've saved some snapshots of the project, just some of the floor plan, and essentially in the floor plan we can kind of see that it's what would we call it, an angle roof almost to some extent. It's almost like a skewed roof to one point, and then we have a bunch of frames, and we can kind of see from the front profile it's turning. So there's an angle associated to it. Not only that, from the side view we have a low elevation of the roof and we have a high elevation of the roof. So it's a very untypical roof. And often, like, sure, I can go through the aspect of creating a roof, but this one proved to be a little bit of a more of a challenge. So that being said, I know some of you might have an idea how to complete a roof like this, but it seems like in the new 2025 edition of Revit, the massing tools is not as flexible as it used to be. I'll go into the details as to why not, but it feels like it's missing some options, and whatever I was able to create in the past, I'm not able to recreate now. So all to say that it's somewhat of a different tool. So we're going to try to adapt this to a new method. And looking from this project, we have this, angle roof, whatever we want to call it, skewed roof. Seems like it's almost like a flat surface. So from the side, it looks really like a flat surface. Not a curved surface. And like I said, the low elevation, high elevation of a roof, it's very dynamic. And we can see here within these frame elevation, frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5, frame 6, frame 7, we can kind of see that the height of a roof is being reduced as we go along. And also so is our structure. Once again, we can kind of see the structure. We have a vertical component, steel component, and then we have these very pitched roofs, 56.26 degrees, but also they're very big components. We'll make this adjustable in our script, obviously, and we'll have to readjust some of these connections just because we won't be able to automate everything. So the idea is, whenever you get across a project like this, you want to be able to create some of these things. After this, once we create the beam, it's going to be a lot easier to create these purlins. I'm less worried about that. I'm more worried about these major components, just because working with beams, working with high elevations, it's a little bit more difficult than anticipated, and you'll see why we say that. So we could do this manually, but we could adapt it and just play around with different designs. So obviously we're going to try to recreate this. The first step is going to be for us to recreate this roof architecturally, and then we're going to complement this with a structural roof. So that being said, let us just open up a couple of things. Essentially, I want to be able to create a project. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new project. We're going to create an architectural template, and we're going to click OK. So once again, we see this, and we want to be able to create somewhat, this little aspect. So like I said, I used to be able to create this relatively quickly. If I go into roofing, you're going to see I'm not going to be able to do this, just because let's say I'm going to create one that's generic, 45 degrees, very simple. You would imagine this would be a very easy possibility. I'm going to make this maybe 7 meters offset. And if I did something like this where it would more or less double check, and I'm going to modify later, this and that, you're going to see you're not going to be able to make this footprint. Revit became weird on this regard. It's not allowing us to do a bunch of things. So we're going to have to adjust our ways and do something a little bit more different. So I'm going to go into my level 1, and I'm going to be making a mass. So what I'll do is I'm going to create an in-place mass. And once again, I'll call this roof. Fairly simple once again. So what I want to do is I want to create a bunch of lines. And like I said, just like previously, we're going to create these, and I'm going to create a 45-degree angle. And we can kind of see that I'm able to do this in the same way that I've done before. The only difference is now we're going to be able to create a little bit more. and I'm just creating a bunch of outline. There is something here that I'm looking at. Once again, the last thing that I want to do is I'm potentially going to create another one at my midpoints. And I'm going to do this. So now I have something fancy like this. Once again, this is the first goal. We're going to try to achieve this. So obviously, let's just try to create this. If I extrude this, it's not going to work out. Potentially, I will initially. Let's just extrude this. Would I be able to extrude this? You know what? I'm not even going to try. I'm going to extrude these individually. To go there, I'm just cycling with the tab. So once I select this, I'm going to just create a form. I'm also going to do for all the rest of my forms. And I like creating this because it's allowing me to create all of it. And we're going to make some modifications later on. So once again, we can kind of see that we have a bunch of roofs. It's turning out all right. In this case, we're not assigning any height particularly. So what I'll do, I'm just going to align these all together so they can all be aligned. In this case, I'm not using a specific angle. I'm just going to go once again, create one type of roof, and we're going to expand this later on. So now that we have this created, what we can do is we're going to create multiple further lines. So I want to be able to create this wall. So you can kind of see that I don't want to select this line. I rather want to select the plane. And I'm going to go at a 45-degree angles on both sides. So once again, I'm not creating on the right one. You just have to ensure that you're creating in the right plane. So now we can kind of see we have some of this. And potentially I could delete this. And you can kind of see we're getting a good outline of the roof. Once again, it's becoming something a little bit more realistic, but we'll adjust this as we go along. So now what I want to do is I want to potentially expand this to go higher. I could potentially just go like this, and let's just assume that we're going to go all the way here. So now what I want to do is I'm going to select this, not this line, but rather I'm going to tab until I select the point, and I'm going to just drag it up. So now we have our famous little curve. The only thing left to do is going to be to create our 45-degree angle. And we're doing this twofold. For one part, we want to get better with it. So obviously there's advantages in knowing this knowledge. And for the second part, we want to be able to recreate some of these things. So once again, we can kind of see this roof is changing slopage. It's becoming smaller. So we're just adjusting some of these massing components. Once you master the massing aspect, you're going to be able to do a lot of this work. So now we can kind of see we've created that outline. It's exactly what we needed to. So now in order for us to kind of fill in the space, kind of like how we have here, I can't select it. I got to select the top line. I got to select the bottom line, and I'm going to create a form. And that form is going to fill in exactly what we need. I'm going to do again for the other side. And I'm going to create a form. So now architecture, we have something that could work. So once again, once I'm happy and I exhausted every option possible, I'm going to click Finish Mass. So now we can see it's becoming something. It's a funky roof, let alone it might not work with these lines that I've done. Ideally, you want to have all this on a singular plane, and you're just kind of adjusting not to have something like this, rather a flat plane, and then just adjusting the angles as you go along. But I wanted to maintain that 45-degree angle everywhere. Just for the sake of it, we're going to try to make this a little bit more complex, and we'll adjust if we have to. So that being said, we can now create roofs because I can go now in my massing and site tab, and I can go into roof, and I'm going to create a roof by face. And I'm going to select my famous roof here. Don't think I'm going to be able to create two at a time, but if I create one at a time, you can kind of see we've created this roof, which is very nice. I'm just going to change this for something a little bit more obvious. So I'm going to make this potentially 125 just to give an overall aspect of this roof. I will make this a little bit bigger. Let me just make this 200 millimeters for the sake of argument. Rename this. And like I said, this is just practice, so obviously you want to get better at it. And we can kind of see we have created a roof. I'm going to change a couple of things. I can't make roof. You see, it's very going to be constricted to what I'm able to create. Regardless, I'm going to keep it like this for now. At least I've managed to create this type of roof. Once again, we're going to be able to adjust this. It's not at the end of the world. We can kind of see I can always go downwards, upwards. So if I ever needed to modify this, I would be able to reduce it. I would be able to bring it down exactly to that level. Just because I've made it like this, I'm going to keep it like this. And now we're going to go into our Dynamo script. So the first part is, let's recreate this roof. And we recreated somewhat of a roof. Now if you needed to change a couple of things, you would obviously be able to change it because, well, what better way to change it than just creating your outlines better, maybe your lines better. But this is how we create that dynamic roof. And we can see it works okay. It's giving us this fancy look. In real life, this is not 100% sloped nor curved. It's gonna be small sections of flat planes. It looks curved from the outside, and sometimes we're gonna cheat a little bit and bend those plywoods, but usually they're gonna be a little bit more on the flatter end. It just overall from a distance it looks like it curves. But otherwise it would be very difficult to create that type of curve. Not impossible, but you would have to wet your wood, bend your wood, dry your wood, do all these miscellaneous things on it. So obviously this is not something that we want to go. You want to just make it appear like it's that. And for most part it works okay. Once you put the shingles and everything else, you're going to be able to bend even more. So it's going to look entirely curved. So that being said, we created a roof. So now let's go into our Dynamo script. So to open Dynamo, let's just open up Dynamo. And we're going to create a new script. I'm going to save this script, potentially not, and let's just save that for another day. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to change automatic to manual. This is usually my go-to steps. And I'm going to go select things. In this case, I'm missing a couple of things that I can't see. I'm going to select a few faces. The reason why I'm selecting a few faces, potentially I'm not going to select a few faces. I will select these individually. The reason why I want to select these individually is because later on we might come across a couple of issues and we'll talk about those issues later. So once again, I can select this and I can select my first roof and I can select the other roof. So that way, when I run these, you're going to see that I actually didn't select nothing here. Thought I did. Alright, now it's a little bit better. Alright, we have two surfaces, we have selected the roofs. So nothing happens yet. We have the roof, we have selected this. Good for us, now we can move forward. So obviously to move forward here a little bit, let me just make some space. I want to be able, I have selected the face, this creates a surface. So obviously the second part is I want to be able to select the parameter of the surface. So usually parameter, if I go parameter, you can kind of see that I have a node that's called returns all boundaries curves of the surface. So if I go here and I do this twice, I'm always going to copy paste this to reapply. We can kind of see that we have this famous little graph. So right now it's going all right. We can see that it's a list of a list. So what I'll do is I usually like to flatten these just for the sake of argument. We can kind of see there's a little bit better. I don't like lists of a list, so I want to flatten this to some extent. So obviously we have our parameter curves. Let me just double check to see if they're appearing here. They don't seem like they are. They're a little bit higher. Zoom to fit. So we can now actually see that we have translated these, which is great. So what we have here, and I'll just place this at the bottom here, so we can actually visualize everything else. So what we have here, we have the parameter, we have the curves, and we flatten this list. So great, I'm just going to leave these on like this. So obviously huge difference in having a line and a NURBS curve. The NURBS curves is consistent of multiple smaller little curves, points. So if I ever broke this down, it's going to be a lot more. So for example, if I do break this down, I'm going to go within geometry, I'm going to go within curves, I'm going to go NURBS curve, and I want to just take a look at these control points. You're going to see when I go like this, my lines are obviously not going to produce anything, but we can see that the NURB curves are producing a lot of points, which is actually not bad, the amount they're considering. It's a little bit more better, I think. With another exercise that I had, I didn't consider 45 degrees, so it's creating a lot more. Once again, it's creating a lot of these things. In this case, we're going to need to manipulate each one of them. I'm going to try to control these individually. And the reason why I'm controlling these individually is because I want to be able to create off section of these points, and potentially not these points, but I'm going to break this down a little bit further. For now, I'm going to just create this. I'm going to need to separate these from the bottom. We'll see how we're going to go on about that, but sometimes I like to take care of the NURB curves first and then the bottom curves second. In this case, we have, I want to connect the top parts to the bottom parts. This is where I'm going to create my connecting lines. So obviously I need to separate these lists. I want to separate the lines from the NURB curves. In order for me to do this, we're going to do this. We're going to leave this little curve. And we can kind of see we have a list. We have another one, but it's empty. We have another one. So we can use this to our advantage. So basically what I want to tell is I want to go into list, and potentially I'll just show you the nodes instead of me always going by shortcuts. I'm going to go into lists, and I'm going to inspect that list, I believe. And I'm going to say, is this empty? So this tells me is my list empty. So once again, you're going to see I don't have anything applicable, which is not what I want to see. I never like to see this. So what I have to do is I have to use levels. I have to go to level 2. I want to not look at these from an individual point, but I want to be able to see. And now I can see I have null, false, null, false. So this is not empty, so it's telling me false. Good, I can use this to my advantage. So now what I want is I'm going to create a string from an object. And potentially there's easier ways to do this. I'm just going to translate these into into strings. And I'm going to do an equal sign. So usually I use not the tolerance one, but this one compares. Just because it's good. So obviously I got this, and I'm going to control this by going string. And I'm going to do here false. So I want to know, does this string contain true or false? If it doesn't contain false, then it's going to say false, true, false, true. So now what I can do next is I can filter by Boolean mask. So this is my mask, and basically we have our flattened list. So I'm going to use this to my advantage, and I'm going to run this once again so I can get both my curves, NURB curves, and my lines separated. So my in is my curves and my out is my lines. So once again, we have two of these. I'm separating these things for ease of viewership. You're going to see later on, it's, a blessing to have these separated just because it's going to be a lot easier to do, to interact with these. Sometimes we can blend some of these things, if we're using false in both cases. I'll just attach them like this, common things. So right now we can kind of see we've created the ins and outs of these curves. Nothing has changed yet. We haven't done any action. We get these warnings. It's just because two of the answers are there's nothing. It's a null answer. I'm okay with the null answer. What I needed is the false ones. So I can use the false ones to kind of filter the false from the truths. Sometimes it's about just how you're going to trick Revit into thinking some of these things. So like I said, it's an advanced subject, but we'll get to the basis of it. And before I go any further, what I want to do is I want to load potentially some beams. So to load the beams, I'm going to go into structure. I'm going to go into structural beams, framing, and I'm going to go backwards, not columns. I'm going to go here and framing. I'm going to use steel. And I'm going to load my white flanges. I'm using metric system. If you're using Imperial, it's going to be the equivalency. Just navigate that same entire world. So I'm just loading, let's say 250, and I might use a bigger one to 360 by 44. There we go. I don't know if I've selected both of them. I wanted to click control. I've clicked on the wrong one. So alright, I've loaded these. I'm just gonna unselect it. I'm still back in my script. So the next thing we want to do is potentially we're gonna need to extract some of these. We wanna split this into equal parts. So we're gonna create some points at at different spaces. So right now I have this. So what I want to do potentially is, if I extract this anywhere, you're gonna see that I'm not necessarily gonna be able to get every one of them. The reason why, I'm gonna still need to flatten them down on the line. Even if I created one out, it's gonna, but we're just gonna do two parts in here. If I go, so I need to extract each one of them individually, and I want to split them individually. I could do it later on. I just like to split them at the beginning. So the only way that I know really, and that I do, I like to really separate these into channels. So I'll have rest of items, and I'll go drop items. So a negative amount will go from backwards. So that way I get twice one amount, and then another time another amount. And we can see this is starting to work out okay. So we've dropped this. So what I want to do is I want to split this. So if I go into not lists, if I go into geometry and I go into curves, I believe, and curves, I'm going to be able to create points at segment length, not segment length. I'm going to use return points spaced equally along the curve lengths based on the input number of divisions. So in this case, I'm going to use this as a basis. I'm just going to use my curve here, and I'm going to break this into 6 curves, into 6 points. So if I run this, you're going to be able to see more points. And once again, I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom one. And now we can kind of see we're adding all these points. There's a lot more points now here. Rest assured, we will connect them later on. So now I get these points, and basically the idea is we want to be able to connect this. So I'm going to create a line, and I'm going to do start to end point. So that way I can connect my points here, and I can connect my points here. And we can see that it doesn't work. It's just because it's backwards a little bit. So once again, if you see here, I have, a list of a list of a list. So sometimes to avoid all this, I just flatten my list. Once again, there's a lot of flattening happening all over the place. So let's just try this out. It's going to provide us a little bit of benefit, easier to control. So once again, nothing's going to change. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to reverse my order on one of them, because I can kind of tell that I'm connecting left and right. So one of them is taking the wrong direction. Once again, what is happening? I have these points telling me argument types called with blah blah blah. Curve reverse. I didn't mean to do curve reverse. I want to do the list reverse. So my list needed to reverse, not my curve. So now that I create them, you can kind of see that I have exactly what I wanted to create. Remember, we're trying to create these nice little things. These are going to be our beams, how they connect. Right now, they're going at some weird angles. We might just consider that later on in a different step. But for now, let's just create what we can, obviously. And we're trying to be a little bit more dynamic and create all this. So once again, I can just copy paste this. And remember, we have 2 streams of these things. So obviously my ins are going here, my ins are going here. And now we can kind of see that within my space, I have these connecting lines. So this signifies that this is exactly where I want my beams to connect. Remember, we have all of this information. So obviously we want to use this to our advantage. So now I could create these beams. And remember, we want to be able to create the beams exactly like this. Kind of so that they're connecting and they're mirrored here in the middle. They might not look 100% exact, but hey, better than nothing at this stage. Because otherwise you're stuck with the roof type and you can't even create the roof, you can't even create the beams. You're having to guess and then adjusting offsets, start offset, end offset. It's always giving these weird results and you're working with angles with beams and it's very difficult. So that being said, let's just continue this process. The process is not far away from where we want to be. So obviously let's just go through this aspect. We're almost there. I mean, we have the lines. These are for the curved. So we could almost create the structural framing. To create the structural framing, I would just need to go into Revit. I'm creating an element. I'm creating a structural framing. And I'm going to create a beam by curve. And the last thing I want to do, potentially I'm going to just select a level. And it's going to be on my level 1. These are going to be my curves. And the structural type is in selection. So within selection, you can select structural framing types. I am choosing my, let's choose this one for the sake of argument. Doesn't need to be complex. And I'm just going to create this real quick. So now we can kind of see, I do have him here, and I did want him to be flat on the bottom. So I might just offset this down the line. We can kind of see that it's actually created one side perfectly nicely. Like I said, the only disadvantage here is I wanted these to be not flush on top, flush on bottom. So I do have somewhat of an offset to do. Remember, if I select one, we can kind of see there's a parameter named Z offset value. So I'm going to change this right away. I'm going to go into element. I'm going to go into element. And I'm going to set parameter by name. These are my elements. My string is going to be Z offset value. Remember, this is case sensitive, so we have to ensure that we're using the correct one. Oh, whoops. And my value is, let's do -200 because my roof is -200. So now if I click on this, we can kind of see that our beams have now been added and they're exactly flush to that. However, we don't have the edges, which is unfortunate. So remember, we split our lines. So we did use the ins. So we're going to use the outs to create all the rest. So once again, I'm just... Where is my ins and outs? Right here. I'm just going to move this a little bit up so I can create the rest of my lines. So once again, we have some outs. So what I want to do is I'm going to do flattening of the list. It's going to be a little bit easier to do on the outs just because we have a little bit less information, and we're going to clear this out later on. Rest assured, we're just slightly working this with a little bit non-proactive way. So what I want to do is, while I have these lists, chances are it might not work 100%. I'm going to use this, and we have here these points, and we have these points. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a list. I'm going to combine this here. I'm going to combine this here, and I'm also going to flatten this. Remember, when you combine, it's going to create two lists. So once again, it's just modifying this a little bit. And now we can kind of see that we've created our side beams as well. So we have here, we have here, we have pretty much everything, which is great, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now that we've achieved all this, what I want to do next is I want to take all this and I'm going to recreate it. So let me just select a couple more. There we go. And I'm going to copy paste this here. So once again, we have these lines and I also have my outlines. So like I said, it is a little bit of a harder subject, but we can kind of see that they've all now created along fine. So what this allows me later on to do is I'm going to just select this. And usually I like to group these, and I'm going to group this, create set of beams, and I'm going to do the same thing on top. Create a set of beams. So we can kind of see this was a very practical way of achieving what we wanted. Now I can clean all of this. I'm just going to select everything and I'm going to clean node layout, and we can kind of see the full extent of this. So this provides us with a very nice way of achieving all this. So to make this a little bit more visible and more obvious, I'm going to just turn on, my mask is still there, sure, it doesn't seem like it. So I'm going to go into roofs. I'm just going to add a little bit of transparency so we can visualize better. So now we can kind of see I have this selection here. So if I ever wanted to change this and I wanted to, I usually like to delete things and then retry, just because sometimes I get these weird effects. So obviously, you know, I could say I don't want to have, how many am I splitting here? 1.6. So this little code, I'm just going to delete this one, and I'm going to connect it here. I'm going to call it number of division just by double clicking it. So now what I can do is I can change this to 12 potentially. And you see if I run this, I get a little bit of errors, which is not what I wanted to do. Why did I mess this up? I messed this up somewhere. Oh, it's because I have here, I need to connect further to these. Definitely messed something up, my apologies. So let's see what I've done. Okay, so why do I have one extra here? Division 6. So I am creating something. I'm doing it for this reason, for no reason. I'm not supposed to have two of them. So my out list is going here. So why am I breaking all of this at the same time? Oh, it's because I'm using it for both segments. Okay, so basically I just got to change one for all of them. Number of divisions. And basically just make sure that you have the same amount of division. What I haven't done earlier, it's because I haven't connected it to these as well. So right now it's still a little bit of a mess. We'll fix this up as soon as possible. So let's just go through some of these things. Like I said, you want to clear this as much as possible. If you have things that you're reusing all over the place, not very practical. So let's just select all of them and let's just clean up our node. In my final layouts, I like to deselect this, and potentially I'm not, because I'm going to re-explain a little bit what I've done. So that being said, if I click now on 12, we can kind of see it works exactly as specified. I do get these errors sometimes, and the reason why I get this error is because for some reason I gotta delete them all, and once I've deleted them all, I can rerun this code and it runs perfectly okay. But the fun part is they matter because they connect exactly in the same location, and we can kind of see now we have our roof, and not only that, we have a perfectly able structure. Very practical on this end, and like I said, there's going to be a little bit of nodes to be added. I am making this messy, obviously. I'm assuming there's going to be better ways to do this. In addition, I don't like to use custom nodes. I don't like using packages. The reason why is because they can depreciate, they can be not updated, and then I'm stuck with something. Then I'm using something, I'm depending on something that might lose its value over time. They might not exist over time. So because of that, I'd like to use out-of-the-box components. Out-of-the-box nodes is the one that are provided by Dynamo, so I'm strictly using that. And you can make this in different ways. This is my most effective way. Let me just do this cleanup one more time. So just to go back through this again, we're selecting a face. We're fetching these parameters curve. We're flattening this. We're creating control points. We're looking at the control points to find if the list is empty. So we can separate these things down the line. It always helps. Remember, if you have duplicates, it's always good to reduce the amount of things. Down the line, I can consolidate this. So once we filter the ins and outs, we get the nerves from the curves, from the lines. We're going to be able to do all of this down the line where we have multiple beams. We can control it, we can change it, we can offset it depending on how much we need to in order for us to create this final product that looks amazing. So now this is very precise, it's aligned. We have this flexibility, and obviously we would be able to control some of these things a little bit better. So now I've just created the generic version of it, but obviously in my example I needed to have this precisely. So I've used a little bit of a different technique in my real life example where I've had to use this just because I had specific grid lines, I had specific spacing, and all of these other things. So obviously I needed to accommodate that. I needed these purlins. But I did go through very similar steps, and now I'm just, going back from from scratch, just to create the roof in the first place, because the roof to create it in the first place is almost very difficult. And then we have to extract all these components. We want to ensure that we get the proper lines, that we get everything extracted. We're separating these at one point as well, where we go and I drop an item and I go rest of item. Basically, rest of item is removing the first one. When I drop an item by going -1, I'm reducing the list by 1 from the end. So this is my way of separating my NURB curves. I got 2 of them. I want to control them individually. Just the way that I've done it. And then, later on, I'm kind of combining these together. I'm using my, just because I got everything. And, that's that for the overall script. I'm gonna go slowly through this. So if you ever want to recreate it, just go through this, take snapshots. This is what our video is for. You get these warnings just because we have null results, but those null results are expected, and I wanted them eventually. So because of that, I'm okay with them. Usually I don't like warnings, but I'm leaving them just because they're intended. And once again, you can kind of visualize all of this. Go through it all, try to recreate it. You can kind of see the blocks. Everything should be clear. And like I said, we've created this one by one. It's a little bit of a complex thing, but there's a purpose to it, and it works out to be flawless. I've done additionally in my other steps where I've created a column based off this. We have here this part, but I've also created the columns. And what I've done with the column is very simple. I've just taken these lines and I extracted the starting points, and then I deducted the Z value of them to get them a new Z value of 0, and I've created the lines from these and the new points, and then I'm just using that the same thing what I've done before in the structural framing. Instead of structural framing, I'm using column by curve, and he uses a curve, a level, and a structural column type. So once again, I'm able to achieve the same thing. The only problem with this one, there's a little bit of, you need to rotate them exactly to where they need to be rotated. And that's a little bit of a different game. We have to then look at the other components that we created to get the proper angle and all of this. But, we can parametrically do them as well. It takes a little bit of time. So once again, just going through this list. If you ever need to retake it and revisualize it, and I'll just save this. You know what? Here we go. I'm going to call this curved roof. Eventually, I will upload all this content somewhere. I do have my BIM 2K website. I've deleted it after a while, so I now need to recreate it a little bit. And on that website, you'll find access to all these classes, and not only to the classes, but also to all the material from the classes. So I'll try to keep everybody updated. The end result is we can actually create something nice like this, and you can kind of see that the fun part, it's really precise, so it connects also in this way. It's mirrored just because that connection is pure, once again very straight, and we can kind of see that it's happening all over the place. And I really like this. It's providing me with a structure model if I ever needed to design. Obviously this is a little bit flawed, as you can tell, and I'm sure a lot of you can tell that these are a little bit bent, but they would be able to work because we have purlins that are holding these together anyways, bracing them technically. So it would still work, and we would be able to create something in between like this. Once again, a lot of benefits in having this knowledge, so knowledge is power. And hopefully you've learned something a little bit more different this time, a little bit more complex, but rest assured there is a reason for this, and hopefully you're going to be able to adapt with this type of technique to create something a little bit more tailored to your own experience, to your projects, and things like that. So on that note, stay tuned for more, and hopefully you've enjoyed my comment by now, and if you haven't, well, hopefully you will eventually, and just subscribe and stay tuned for more. Thank you again.